Norm and Joey comedy hour.
So, a rabbi, the Pope, and Barack Obama walk into a bar, and the bartender says, "What is this, a joke?"
I actually like that one. That's pretty good.
You're dying. Okay.
Zombies interviewing for a job, and the boss says,
Yay.
"So what kind of worker are you?" And he says, "I'm a very dedicated employee." And then he says, "Did he work weekends?" The zombie said, "Of course." Hey.
Were you saying boo or boo earns?
What's next? We're going to listen to a round of Free Your Brains.
So I apologize, we have one screen, so if anyone on this side would now like to move over to this side, so the presentation, now's
You
the
better
time.
make changes or it's gonna.
Alright, and I'll end the joke hour with there are two fish. Oh no.
It's a little cut off there.
Killed the resolution. Hold on. I got it. There are two fish in a tank. One turns to the other and says, "You know how to drive this thing?"
That was pretty good. I don't know. I liked it.
Nothing actually. I liked it.
And the other fish says, "Holy crap, talking fish." There we go.
There we go. Okay, we're ready.
So, hello everybody. I am Rue, also known as Joey DeSena. I am part of Clan of the Grey Wolf, Retroware TV. Also, I make web shows like 16-Bit Gems and The Way Games Work. And you are?
Hi, I'm Norm Caruso, and I do a documentary series known as The Gaming Historian.
And if you are here, there's more people than we expected, and we assume the reason is...
You may be wondering where this man is.
So, Pat, for various reasons, had to skip out on coming to MAGFest a few weeks ago. Originally, he and Ian Ferguson from the Pat the NES Punk Show were going to join us to talk about this. So, in lieu of that, we recommend that you all tweet at him and say something about asking his opinion on Gamergate.
Oh yeah, he loves it.
So this is a talk just to let you know a little bit about preserving video games, how you can preserve video games, things to watch out for, and some of the more interesting aspects of video game preservation being done by various organizations, people around the world. We'd like to open it up to questions at any time during the presentation. So if you have a question, just put the hand up and we'll call on you. Yeah, so.
Questions or comments?
So first up is, why should we care? Here we have Herman Melville in a jaunty party hat.
Yeah, so we just want to talk about first about other forms of media that have been lost over history. So everyone knows, I hope everybody knows the author Homer. Not Homer Simpson, Homer, the Iliad, the Odyssey.
Yes.
Okay. So he wrote a book, epic poem before the Iliad known as Margites, and it doesn't exist anymore. We only have references to it from Aristotle. Another example, Herman Melville wrote a book based on a true story called The Isle of the Cross. Submitted it to his publisher. His publisher said, no thanks, and no one knows what happened to it. Ernest Hemingway, this is a good story, he served in World War I, wrote a lot of short stories, had them in a briefcase, gave them to his lover at the time. She got on the train and she lost the briefcase. So he had a bunch of stories that no longer exist. No one knows where they are.
So, I mean, it makes sense. Literature's been around for thousands of years in one form or another. Surely, you know, lost poems from Homer may not be that surprising, but the thing is that preservation of all forms of media has been a problem. This is the only surviving clip from, if it works, which it's not.
Great, now it's lost forever.
Assume that this is a moving image. It's about 16 seconds long. It's the only surviving clip from a movie called Cleopatra, made in 1917. At the time, it was the most elaborate Hollywood film ever made. It cost about $500,000 in 1917 dollars, and employed 2,000 people. But the thing is, no one paid attention. No one in the 20s or in the teens, 19 teens, really cared about preservation. They just went on to make the next big movie. And the Film Foundation, which totally sounds like a made-up organization, but is not, has estimated that about half of all American films made before 1950, and 90% of those made before 1929 are lost forever, for various reasons. The film stock is very flammable, there were fires, and no one took a lot of steps to specifically preserve those films. And even television, this is probably not going to work. Nope. Here. Dang it. This is the only known clip of the first Doctor from Doctor Who regenerating. This was in 1966, I want to say. This comes from a four-part story called I think it's 4 parts, called The 10th Planet, and all we have is like this 20-second clip. That was only found years after the fact, and the BBC was notoriously bad for saving their footage for preservation later on. Also, please visit and subscribe to the BBC.
Play the Cleopatra clip, actually.
Oh, sorry, yes. And here's this is really fascinating. This is almost 100 years old. Amazing work on the costumes and a little bit of sexy look. So, this is all that really exists.
And the main reason that these institutions were throwing away these TV shows and films was there was no more commercial value for them. So they said, well, we need to clear some storage space, so let's just burn a bunch of films.
Yeah, it was only years later that people were saying, hey, whatever happened to the old Doctor Who show? Like, oh, crap. So,
You want to see that?
And there are still something like 90 whole episodes of Doctor Who that are missing. You know, if you're a fan of Doctor Who, I'm sure you already know about this, but that even now, it's a 50-year-old program, 51 years now, and it's, you have about 90 or so episodes just missing off the face of the planet that may never be found. So it's discouraging at times.
Yeah, it's not an old media problem. There's missing films from the 70s and 80s that we'll never see. The British Film Institute, speaking of the BBC, has a 75 most wanted list. So they're still actively searching for these TV shows and movies that they have no idea where they went.
And so why is this, and how does this relate to video games? Well, this is something I completely made up. So if you find fault with it, please feel free to let me know. But in my mind, I was thinking about, it's like, well, there's kind of this spectrum of public interest. And yes, I know the name needs work. But essentially, if you could chart how much interest a particular piece of media has in the public consciousness, in this case, video games, red and white being very high, the warm colors meaning there's a lot of interest, people are really interested, and then the cooler colors like purple and blue, not so much. Usually, the sequence of events goes, you have something new and shiny, and oh my god, isn't it great? Everyone wants it. After a while, a few years, it becomes old. No one really cares anymore. Now's the time to buy PS3 and Xbox 360 and Wii games because they're discount binned at GameStop, right?
Clear space.
At some point, there's an inflection point where suddenly people are going, I remember Grand Theft Auto 3. I used to play that when I was a kid. Wouldn't that be interesting to pick up again and have that, maybe play it? And at that point, something becomes retro, which is a very wide-reaching description of video games. I mean, this can go from the Atari now almost up to the PS2, where something is old, but we don't call, retro gaming is called retro gaming and not old gaming because old gaming has a bad connotation. Retro is like, oh yeah, what's the line from Wreck-It Ralph? Retro is old but cool, which is basically
I
true.
think everybody has their own definition of what retro is.
Yes, and like I said, you can argue it. Oops, sorry. And then in certain instances, something will become an antique. So examples of this, and an antique is like very valuable and very rare. Not always. So something new, Grand Theft Auto 5. You can get it now for new, $60 on PS4, et cetera, et cetera. Grand Theft Auto 4 is probably $10 in the bargain bin at GameStop. I just mentioned Grand Theft Auto 3. I have a friend who literally bought his girlfriend PS2 for Christmas because she wanted to play Grand Theft Auto 3. So there you go. Retro, Mario Brothers, obviously. You know, that's something that when it was old, we were discussing this yesterday. Super Mario Brothers 5 years ago could be had, Mario Brothers Duck Hunt specifically, could be
Probably
had
$1.
for maybe $1.
Yeah.
Because there's tons of them. Now, it's like $7
$7.
roughly
Yeah.
on eBay to buy a copy because people want more of it and the price goes up. Not a ridiculous amount, but it goes up. And then antique cabinets like Pong and Space War, which is actually the first. Pong was not the first arcade game, Space War was. These were made in the early 70s and you know, electronics break down. It's hard to find a cabinet that's working. It's an antique, literally. So.
Yeah, I mean, the wood paneling kind of gives away that it's pretty old.
So the struggle here is to preserve media during that old period until it can reach the inflection point where people are more interested in preserving it, and then future generations can have it. So, game collecting. Though some games will increase in price, I wish I had bought, you know, 1,000 copies of Earthbound about 15 years ago. Don't see it as an investment. Do it because you're a fan of a given system or era. I obviously, if you watch my show, I really like Super Nintendo. I'm very slowly and stupidly trying to go for a full collection. That's because I love the system. It's one of my favorites ever, and I think it's the pinnacle of 2D gaming. If you want to preserve cultural heritage, if you are interested in preservation for future generations, maybe you're just a general historian, but you have a tiny bit of interest in video games, you're like, hey, yeah, maybe I could do something with that. And just because it's fun. Sometimes it's fun to go game chasing, trademark, or something like that. You like to go out to flea markets at 7 in the morning for some stupid reason. On the chance you'll find that, you know, Flint stores at Dinosaur Pete for $5, right?
Yeah. And it's weird. I've actually talked to people that say I'm not really into games. I just like the thrill of the hunt, and so it's not.
It's like a hobby.
Yeah, it's a hobby
For some people.
Yeah.
I mean, I can only take it so far, but we know of people who are kind of ridiculous about it.
A little crazy. Yeah.
Yes. Speaking of,
Yeah.
so tips on cleaning your own cartridges. Specifically speaking about cartridges here. You know, NES, Super Nintendo, Genesis, 64, stuff like that. We were actually we're discussing this because we're watching the Farewell Famicom Rider video last night, which was made in honor of Justin Jew Warrior Carmichael. And there was a line in there about how you can clean the contacts of a cartridge with rubbing alcohol and a Q-tip. And someone else says, no, you can't do that. Nintendo specifically says on the back of the cartridge that will damage the contacts. And they were having an argument about it. And Norm, I asked Norm, like, is that actually true? Because, you know, a lot of people use rubbing alcohol to clean contacts because that's the main, especially with NES games, that's the main problem when you get the flashing, you know, bit on the screen. But a lot of people use rubbing alcohol to clean the contacts.
Yeah, Nintendo wanted to sell their cleaning kit to people, so they said, don't use this very common rubbing alcohol you can get for 90 cents in the store. You should buy our official cleaning kit. Go ahead.
What I've heard is that rubbing alcohol still leaves a little bit of residue on contacts. So, like, your isopropyl alcohol is actually better than rubbing alcohol.
That is true. Isopropyl, I believe, is a
I'm
high.
sorry, I'm using the term rubbing alcohol incorrect. I just mean, yeah.
Isopropyl, which is like 90% alcohol or something
Right,
like that.
yes.
Yeah, the reason why it's good is because you can clean the grime off a contact, but it evaporates very quickly, as opposed to water, you know, which you definitely don't do, or Windex, which you
Now, I
don't
will
use.
say, the NES pin connector, if you boil that, It works.
Even the 72-pin connector in the NES?
No, you don't put the entire NES.
No.
You take the 72-pin connector and you boil it in, what's that water called?
Water?
No, you can't use tap water.
Hot water.
Distilled water, yes. If you boil it in distilled water, I swear to God, it works. You'll look at the water, it's disgusting. All this dirt and grime will be in there. But yeah, you can boil the pin connector. I wouldn't do that with a cartridge because there's, electronic chips and whatnot in there. But yeah, not rubbing alcohol, I'm sorry. Isopropyl alcohol, yeah.
That's perfectly fine with a Q-tip.
Yeah, fine with Q-tip, and then you can actually take the other side of Q-tip, wipe it off to get any excess residue off. I worked computer repair in high school for a few years, and even like if somebody said I spilled coffee or soda on my laptop, we would literally just dump alcohol and let it sit for a day, and it would usually fix it. So yeah, in the white eraser, sometimes these contacts will get these like black marks on there that are hard off, and a white eraser actually gets them off.
You mean an actual eraser, not magic eraser?
Not a magic eraser, specifically a white eraser. You don't want to get like a pink one.
Yeah,
You
and that's something else. I actually did a video on cleaning old game cartridges. There's something called Mr. Clean. The brand name is Mr. Clean Magic Eraser. It's basically a melamine foam.
Great for Sharpies.
Yeah.
Sharpie marks on
Yes. Because it's almost impossible to get Sharpie marks out of a cartridge otherwise. But basically what it is, it's like a very, very fine-grained sandpaper. And it does take off like a thin layer of the cartridge, basically.
It's worth it though.
It's worth it,
Sharpie
yeah.
off.
If you go crazy with it, notice it get a little bit shiny, but if you're gentle, it's a great tool for cleaning cartridges. Sunlight is the natural enemy of the video game cartridge in its natural habitat.
And manuals.
Yeah, I mean, if any of you have been out to flea markets, you've probably seen people with boxes of cartridges or whatever sitting out in the sun and they're sun bleached, and that can happen after just a few weeks of that person taking it out. Really, it's sad. You want to save all the little games.
And I always see like game stores. They have like posters in their window, and they turn like this ugly, dull color.
Yeah, and that's something we didn't even talk about is video game merchandise, which is also usually put out in the storefront. Yeah, that's really susceptible to sunlight.
Amiibos, keep them in the box. Keep your Amiibos in the box. But, was there a question over here? I thought I saw
White eraser.
White eraser? Huh?
Oh, you're.
No, it worked.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, he was just asking about the white eraser work. You already.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah, definitely keep your question.
Pink,
So the question was why white eraser versus pink?
pink will actually leave it's a little more rough than a white eraser. It'll actually leave a residue on there, and it kind of breaks apart when you're rubbing it on the contact.
It's probably harder in my experience.
Much harder eraser.
It's a harder rubber.
Yeah, a white's a very delicate eraser that works much better. It won't leave as much residue on the contact.
It's very delicate, like Norm.
Yes.
So yes, avoid sunlight and try to keep your case, not just your games, but your cases and your manuals as well out of sunlight and in a kind of a temperature controlled environment if you can help it. Sticking it out in the garage, it might not be for years and years, it might not be in the sunlight, but that's not the best temperature controlled environment.
Yeah, and even those like dust covers for games, I think those help.
Which, yes, it's a joke to put Pat in this picture, but there was a real reason. If you'll notice, he keeps his collection
He's got boxes and then plastic surrounding the box.
Yeah, these are plastic
Total preservation.
game box protectors. You can find them on Amazon or eBay. They're relatively cheap. If you have a collection of especially boxed games that you want to keep safe on the shelf, I haven't done this and I need to, you can get just a bunch of them for relatively cheap. I can't remember the cost off the top of my head, but it's definitely a good idea.
And Pat was going to freeze these games, right?
Yes, in carbonite.
Yes. Crazy.
But also saying that having the original box or case is huge for preservation, especially the old cardboard boxes that Nintendo would put games in. How many of us, when we were kids, when we'd get an NES or Super Nintendo box or whatever, we'd be like, oh boy, a game! Rip up the box, throw it out, and we're like, I got the game, yay! And then 20 years later, you're like, oh, complete, it's $500. So I mean, it's not so much you can do right now to save those boxes that were thrown around like 20 years ago, but if you're starting out, especially with newer systems, it's a little bit easier with newer systems, with the physical media, because they're functional. They're not just cardboard.
Yeah, and even speaking not only as like, oh, this makes the game more valuable, like there's some cool stuff in these manuals and boxes that came with the game. I mean, some of these manuals have like original artwork that you would never see anywhere else.
Yeah, that's very true. Especially some of these old RPGs with huge, thick manuals when Nintendo was like, come on, North America, get
Let me teach you how to play an RPG.
Here's an issue that is talked about a lot on forums that I'd like to address in disk drive. So, this is an actual thing, excuse me, but it's not what a lot of people think it is. It's basically something that's trapped in, so the way a CD works is that you have a reflective layer that the laser can bounce off of, and there's like a clear plastic coating on top that protects that layer. Sometimes during the pressing, especially earlier CDs, meaning earlier games, like this is a big problem with laser discs and maybe like early CDI games and stuff like that. But if there's an imperfection or some air trapped inside after time, that can oxidize and that can kind of ruin that part of the game, and basically cause little imperfections like you can see to the left here. That's holding up a disc to the light. You can see
through the disc.
You can actually see a hole. To the right is kind of like a warping. That's more of an issue at the factory when it was pressed. So games in general will still work if you have this. So don't freak out if you go home and like your copy of Link Faces of Evil has disk ride. It'll probably still play, but it's something to kind of note. Maybe if you're looking at that, you should be like, oh, I should try to keep it in a better environment or something like that. I mean, there's no way to really prevent it, but it will eventually, could eventually be an issue.
Yeah, and I want to mention disk resurfacing for a second, because
when you get scratches on the disc.
Yes, anybody that's bought a game from GameStop, I'm sure has experienced a completely scratched disc, even maybe a new game. If you take it to a store and they have a good resurfacing machine, it actually does work very well. I mean, there's some cheap resurfacing machines that, it's going to look exactly the same when it pops up, but if you can find a store that's a good one, it's worth getting a disc resurfaced.
So, and what that does is basically, if you have a scratched disc, it takes off the top layer of the like either acrylic, I can't remember, or plastic coating, and leaves a clean surface so that the layer's not bouncing off of the protective layer, right? More pictures of disk rot. So to the right, you'll see an example of what disk rot can do. It doesn't necessarily ruin a game, but it can cause problems with video in particular.
With disk resurfacing, there's another alternative where I've used a really cheap peanut butter, preferably creamy. And,
Okay, I got it.
It's cheaper and better. You wipe it on the bottom of the disc, and then use a coffee filter to buff it out in circles around it. Ideally, you can use, then you wipe off the peanut butter at the end. It works amazingly. Apparently, the car wax is better, but it's more expensive than really cheap.
Okay, yeah.
So
bump out the scratch.
the comment, if you didn't catch it, was about using really cheap peanut butter, quote, and a direct quote, and just kind of rubbing it in on a game and using a coffee filter to wipe it off. And car wax should work better, but it's more expensive than cheap peanut butter.
So Peter Pan made that one.
Toothpaste will work as well.
And I was going to say, actually, I've heard of toothpaste also being used. What that does is that it kind of fills in the cracks. It's clear, like the oils, essentially, like the oils in the peanut butter is clear enough to still allow light to pass through. I don't know if I would recommend it. You can try it. I haven't tried it myself, so I can't say for sure if it works or if it's a good idea.
Yeah.
Well, the toothpaste is because the toothpaste is actually a very fine abrasive.
Oh, okay, so the toothpaste
So
is a
it will
fine
actually,
abrasive. That makes sense.
it will actually abrade off that.
Yeah. So the car wax and the peanut butter will fill in the scratches, and the toothpaste will basically buff it out.
Yep.
Yes. Question?
Should you still eat the peanut butter?
Definitely eat the peanut butter afterwards, and you can taste the sadness of Mario from the Hotel Mario disc.
You probably look it directly off the disc, like if you just wanted to scoop it out with the disc.
So again, with cartridges, the best things to do in this instance are to just keep them out of sunlight, and particularly ultraviolet radiation, which there's a lot of in sunlight. In the back, sorry.
Yeah,